Many of you know I've been telling true stories about things that happened in my life. And this story I'm about to tell you is true. You're going to say, that couldn't have happened. But it did. And actually, there were other people in the area, and they got pictures, and even one of the pictures ended up in the local newspaper. So I guess it's time to sit down and tell you that story. It's a very strange one. It was early 1990s, I believe. Must have been about 94. I think it was the year before we went north to Bristol Bay, and where I worked up there in an area the size of Ohio and covered over 30 villages on a federal program through Region 10. And let me kind of set the stage for you. It's late July and August, and we get what's called the Sitka doldrums. At least I call it that. That's where the weather is probably, as far as I'm concerned, the worst weather you can have. It's day after day, sometimes 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks of nothing but a deep, foggy drizzle. Drizzling continually. I mean, it's so thick you can cut it with a knife. And it's day after day after day like that. You can get up at 5 in the morning, look around, can't tell what time it is. You can get up at noon, it looks the same. Before you go to bed at night, 9, 10 o'clock, it still looks the same. It's just gray drizzle. It just sucks in around Sitka, and it can be there for quite a while. And it's probably the worst time of year for my muscle disease, and for people that have arthritis and stuff, it flares up. It's no fun. I kind of dread seeing those days come. Anyway, we needed just a little bit of fresh fish, and I wanted to get a lingcod or something, so I used to go out through Crescent Harbor here in my skiff and go up past 8 Mile Rock, and there'd be some pinnacles under the water, 40, 50 feet down, steep rock pinnacles, and a good place for lingcod around it, and I'd jig for them. And it was one of them dreary days, and so I'm riding my boat and going over the little waves, you know, the wind's not blowing bad, it ain't too bad outside. And I get to the other side of 8 Mile Rock, and I look out in the distance, and along the edge out there, I see something dark. I mean, darker than the sky. It's dark and gray enough the way it was drizzling. And I looked at it, and it's got to be either a bad squall or something going on. But then I got my binoculars out, trying to see, and I see this, it's a white speck come out from behind this dark thing. Now I'm getting really curious. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to go check that out. So I put the old boat in gear, and I start heading towards this white speck. Well, it wasn't long before I noticed I could see the red line. So I knew, right, that's a Coast Guard boat, right? Yeah. A 50, 60 footer. And so I started to turn around, and I looked, and I said, what's that dark thing behind it? Whatever it was huge. It was like 10 times as long as the Coast Guard. You know, this thing had to be 500, 600 feet long or longer. And it had a tall part on it. This is really strange. So I continue out, and closer and closer and closer, and all of a sudden I look, and I'm looking at a giant submarine. I mean, this thing is huge. And I kept getting closer and closer and closer, and I noticed that they had taken something off the submarine and they were putting it on the Coast Guard boat. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I got a little bit closer, and I could see the guys on the Coast Guard boat were packing up and and helping them load groceries. I mean, you could tell the boxes of bananas and oranges and bags of potatoes and onions and just... And I got close enough that the guys in the counting, on the top of the boat, the counting tower or wherever it is, observation room, I'm looking up there like that at them. There's 3 guys looking down at me. And then all of a sudden I turn around and I look, and around the corner of the submarine comes this little craft. Now the best way to describe it would be, it was a part inflatable and part hard bottom. And I can't remember if there was 3 guys in there, or 4 guys. But a couple of them had what looked like M16s. And they're coming around, and they're heading straight towards me. And I'm still kind of drifting closer and closer to the sub. And they got within about, maybe 100 yards from me, a little more than that. And so I just put my boat in gear, shut my engine off, and just sat there. Well, they did the same thing. They just shut the boat off, sat there, and watched me. And I looked up at the submarine. There's no flag. There's no numbers. It's just a big, gray, huge submarine, enormous thing. I was just overwhelmed by the size of it. You know, here's a 50, 60-foot Coast Guard boat, and it looked like a little pram next to it. Anyway, they got done loading all them groceries, and they started to pull off. By then, there was a couple of commercial fishing boats that had come through the fog and the mist, and one of them must be the one who took the picture, because somehow a picture got sent to the local newspaper of the submarine. They didn't show the Coast Guard boats. They must have been a different angle or something when they took the picture. Anyway, a little article in the Sitka newspaper, you know, submarine spotted in Sitka Sound. Anyway, I'm just kind of yelled over to the guys on the right. I said, I don't see any flags. Who's that belong to? They never said a word. They sat there watching me. Pretty soon, Coast Guard ship moves off, and the guys in the little boat go back out and go behind the submarine. And it was only a minute or two later, and the submarine, which is still sitting on the surface, okay, it's still sitting there, and it starts up and starts heading towards kind of the, I guess it would be the west end of Bjork Island. Well, I decided to follow it. And so I start my up engine, and I'm going wide open. I'm doing probably, in that little skiff, I'm doing 20, 25 knots. But this damn blasted big submarine was pulling out ahead of me. Now what happened to the guys in the small little craft, whether they're moving along the side of them, or they loaded that thing in a real hurry, I don't know, because those guys had disappeared. And I don't know, I don't think they were Coast Guard. I don't know who they were. So anyway, the submarine's going farther and farther and farther out. I was saying, oh, wouldn't it be neat to watch it submerge, you know? Finally, got far ahead of me and started going around the corner of Bjork Island, and I finally just gave up. I says, I can't catch this thing. And so it ended up in the newspaper. What they were loading on that sub, I know, was groceries. Looked like it to me. What they took off of there, I had no idea. But they put something off that sub into that boat when I first got there. But anyway, I was just totally amazed at the size of this thing. I'd seen another one a few years later over parked in Aleutiana Bay. Came around the corner, and they was sitting there, and they had a Coast Guard boat guarding the entrance to the little bay, so you couldn't go in and get any closer to it. Right in the middle of the day, on a bright sunny day, and I had another guy with me who had a brand new video camera, and he was trying to shoot video from my boat, little boat, into where the submarine was at the bay, and his camera wouldn't work. I mean, it would not record. And if it did turn on, it just got a black screen. Well, he was ex-military, and quite a bit older than I was. And he said, you know, I think they're blocking, so I can't take a video of this thing. As soon as we left and went somewhere else, his video camera worked again. I don't know. So anyway, that's part of the story. It gets more interesting. Let me tell you what happened next. Before I finish my story, I want to remind you that I've got other stories, all true, all involve me, on my website, I should say YouTube channel, Exploring Sitka, Alaska. So check them out. Oh, yeah, it's time to finish my story. Called up my dad, who lived at the time around Enumclaw, Washington. And I told him about my submarine story. I might even send him a news article saying that they spotted a nuclear submarine in Sitka Sound. And I told him everything that happened about taking something off the submarine, taking groceries off the Coast Guard boat. And I didn't hear anything for a while, and then it was about 5-6 months later, my dad calls up and he says, "Hey, I got a story to tell you." And I says, "Oh, what's it about?" He says, "Submarine." And so he told me he was out with a friend at Enumclaw Golf Course, or it was somebody he had met when they played teams up there or something. But this particular person, he said his name, I'd never heard of him before. He had brought his son with him. And my dad, of course, he's always friendly talking to somebody. He starts asking this kid, early 20s, "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm in the Navy." "Oh, you hear gunshots. Somebody's shooting a deer up there. Hope they get one." Anyway, lose my track here, but anyway, this guy's son, he's in the Navy, and he says, "Well, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm on a submarine." And my dad, he just throws it right out there. He says, "Do you know anything about a nuclear submarine surfacing in Sitka Sound in Sitka, Alaska, and the Coast Guard took something off the submarine and put groceries on it?" And my dad said this guy just about freaked out. He said, "How did you know about that?" So anyway, it was my dad's time to tell my story to this individual. And it turned out they got a little more information. And submarine was the Henry M. Jackson. Now all the nuclear boomers that carry nuclear weapons, they carry 20 missiles with anywhere 4 to 6 separate warheads that can go different areas. And it's what they call the boomer. It's the biggest class made of American submarines. The Soviets or Russians make one bigger. Anyway, it's the Henry M. Jackson. It's the only submarine that's named after a person and not a state. And it's one of the first ones. It's been refitted a number of times. They started out with the older missiles, and then they went to the newer Polaris missiles, I guess they are, longer range. They fire over the pole, can hit Russia from a lot of different areas in the Atlantic. This one's stationed out of Bremerton, Bangor. And he said that what they took off that submarine that day was a very sick sailor. Somebody fired again. Anyway, they took a sick sailor off and they put him in the hospital here at Sitka. And at the same time, they decided to, put a bunch of fresh fruits and vegetables and whatever else on the submarine for him. But anyway, he told my dad that the submarine that come up from that Seattle area, the patrol out here, they like to sit sometimes on the bottom for long periods of time. They just sit down there quietly. And one of their favorite places, he said, he had 2 favorite places. One was over here in Salisbury Sound. There's a deep hole. If you look on a chart, you'll see a deep hole in Salisbury Sound. I think it's almost 1,000 feet deep. They sit down there on the bottom. Just quietly sit there. Do whatever they do. Wait and see if they get a go order or whatever it is. The other spot they like to set is here in Sitka in Eastern Channel. Now, Eastern Channel is about 400 or 500 feet deep. Runs across there. And they sit down there, and he says, we just listen to the fishing boats and cruise ships go by all the time above them. And they can sit there, and what's nice about being there, they said, is at night, they just surface, and then a Coast Guard boat will run out and deliver fresh groceries. So they can sit there for a long time eating fresh salad. So anyway, that's pretty much what I know about these big submarines. Other than they are big. I mean, this thing was enormous. I think it's 560 feet long. And I think from the water to the conning tower is 30 feet. Like I said, I was looking up at those guys, looking down at me. I still don't know who those people were in the little raft. But there's been a number of other people in Sitka that off and on have had glimpses of submarines. Now, here's the question. Are there nuclear weapons in Sitka, Alaska? Well, are there submarines sitting in Eastern Channel? That's your answer.